Before anyone reached for it, the wine glass shivered, its thin foot nudging the scarred edge of the table as if an invisible weight leaned in. And the crimson spill rolled sideways, a ribbon of garnet racing across the cream invitation. It struck the seal, paper curling under the smear, and the candle on the sill flickered out with a soft, exhausted breath, while the chair opposite stayed still, its cushion untouched. No other movement answered the hush, only the liquid's whisper sliding toward the doorway. I wiped the smear with a damp cloth, careful to follow the curling edge of the invitation without tearing it. The cloth left a damp arc that dried into a pale crescent before the candle's flame, now steady, warmed the room with a soft, amber pulse. Across the table, Mara's hand rested on the chair back, thumb tracing the worn braid of the wood as she watched the last wine ribbon settle into the seal. "Still set for tonight?" she asked, voice low as a stream over stones. I slid the inkstone closer in answer, the polished shell catching the candlelight in a slow, deliberate gleam. Her gaze drifted to the frost, etching tiny feathers along the window pane, and she nodded as though agreeing with the lacework about our quiet certainties. Between us, the tea kettle on the stove hissed once, a steady note, while outside the courtyard, the neighbors' shutters scraped open with the practiced rhythm that meant the day had begun. We moved within these measured gestures, trusting that the warmth flavored by familiar jokes and shared silences would see us through the ordinary pace of morning. The hall hummed with stretching chords and whispered reminders. Elise dragged a crate of votive candles across the floor, while volunteers lined up chairs, all glancing toward John as if he were the North Star. When he swept in with a clipboard, sleeves rolled, murmurs spiked into reverent comments. If anyone can keep this vigil whole, it's John. Mara breathed, hands pressed to her chest. They read every sharp exhale of his as devotion, proof he cared, not exhaustion. John set the candles in exact rows and tapped his pen against the clipboard. "Keep the left aisle open until the hymn starts," he said, then straightened and scanned the room. Elise lifted her head from the crate and asked about the coordinating call after the ceremony. She needed to confirm the sound tech's arrival. John's smile flickered. His gaze dropped to the pocket of his vest, fingers brushing the edge of a folded slip of paper buried there. He shook his head, murmuring, "Let's do it after the procession." And his thumb dragged along the seam before he turned to point at Mara, who was still insisting she could juggle the candle holders alone. The lights buzzed softly in the rafters as John and Elise stepped out to the narrow side corridor to check the string of lanterns. He leaned over the table to test a plug, and Elise crouched beside him, watching how his jaw tightened when a stray spark zipped across the metal coil. "You always say you want every moment to count," she said, the words low enough to stay between them. He let out a breath, adjusting the plug. "Devotion already has my head in the right place," he replied, scooping up the coil where it sizzled. A damp patch of shadow clung to his shoulder. When he felt her eyes, he dropped the cord and the shadow crossed his face like something he would rather leave in the dark. A volunteer, Jonas, hurried up with the sign-in sheet. "I need your initials for the prayer leader's roster," he said, handing the clipboard back. John's hand closed around the pen and then stalled. While Jonas chatted about procession order, John's gaze flicked through the doorway to the backstage hallway. Someone pushed the door open a sliver, and a breeze slipped a pale envelope out from their clearance table. John's thumb curled over the flap, and then he tucked it back, muttering, "Just an update from the studio." Jonas leaned in, squinting at the dates scrawled by candlelight, and John signed without looking up. Elise stood a breath away, watching the pen stutter over the paper for a flicker longer than it ever used to. When she touched his sleeve, he straightened, forcing a smile that barely cracked the corners of his mouth. "I'll be right back," he said, nodding toward the altar. "Stay near the stage until I circle back." She nodded, the promise settling in her chest, like a stone she didn't drop. As he walked toward the steps, she slid along the side wall, close enough to see the envelope now tucked behind his belt. The room still interpreted every furrow in his brow as sacrifice. She kept that script alive with a whispered, "You're doing everything right." But her fingers curled once around a stray candle, the way someone might grip a handle before carrying something heavy. She stayed there, near the stage, listening to the chairs scrape and the volunteers breathe. For now, devotion held the frame, but the crooked line she glimpsed didn't fade. Candles guttered in the nave as the last of the mourners stepped outside. Smoke curled from the brass censer, carrying the faint tang of rosemary and salt. Elise stayed by the center aisle, breathing steady enough to keep the tremor out of her voice. John crossed the marble floor toward the sacristy with the same careful gait he reserved for the altar rail. Slow, deliberate, his hand trailing the carved bench rail as if to anchor himself. "Before you go?" Elise said, the words landing between them like a stone in still water. "After the blessing, you slipped when I asked about the call. You said it was urgent, then said the clergy needed you. The roster guys said you lingered even when your shift was done." She didn't reach for his sleeve. Her fingers curled into the edge of the pew instead. He stopped, turned, and the candlelight painted shadows across his cheekbones. "There's something I still have to fix in the sacristy," he replied, eyes not rising fully. "I'll be back before the candle watch wraps up." A volunteer, Marisol, had been wiping down the stone font nearby. She stepped closer, holding the linen in one hand, the other fisted at her side. "I heard you," she said, nails digging into the cloth. "When you signed the roster, your pen kept hovering. The others were already at the vigil. You told them you were waiting for a confession, but you didn't explain why you were sweating. Felt like you were about to tell someone something else." John glanced toward Marisol. His jaw flexed. Then he let out a breath that fogged the cool air. "It wasn't a confession," he said. "It's paperwork for tomorrow's Mass. The bishop wanted the names double-checked." Elise heard the insistence, but the tilt in his voice didn't match the words. Her heart pushed against her ribs, not because she feared storming him, but because he wouldn't meet her eyes. "If there's paperwork," she said, "then show me the slip so I know it's not something else." He pulled the folded note from his vest pocket with slow motion. The paper trembled between his fingers. When he laid it on the altar rail, the ink caught the light. Flat guardian names, nothing more. Marisol exhaled. "It's never been this focused before," she murmured, gaze flicking between John's hands and Elise's face. Usually he's all in, but tonight he seemed like he was in two places. John looked at Elise then, and for a heartbeat the room narrowed to their faces. "I'm trying to keep everyone on track," he said quietly, "even when something else is gnawing at me." Elise's fingers let go of the pew with a soft scrape. "We all feel gnawing," she whispered, "but not all of us avoid the person who might help us chew through it." He didn't answer. He tucked the paper back into his vest and motioned toward the sacristy once more. "Come back in 10, he said. "I'll be there." Marisol began stacking hymnals near the door. "Whatever's gnawing," she said. "We all heard the scrape tonight. Don't let it swallow the rest of the watch." Elise nodded, watching John go. The candle smoke followed him down the aisle, mixing with the lingering scent of rosemary and doubt. She kept her gaze on the door as he disappeared, eyes tracking the gap he left in the amber light. In the hush, Marisol's confession hung between them, not accusation, just a shared admission of discomfort with the contradictory signals they'd seen. John had retreated, but the admission let her breathe a little. The tiny release of knowing she wasn't alone in sensing the tension. The basement of St. Aiden's was still lit by the flicker of votive candles, but the hum of folding chairs and whispering voices had taken over the remnant hush from the vigil. Sister Teresa leaned over the recorder, the plastic light blinking red, and nodded to Elise. "Just speak the moment," she said, calm but firm. "How did the waiting feel?" Elise pressed her palms together until her knuckles blanched. "I kept imagining every signal meant something," she said into the microphone. John's steps, his pauses, the way he stopped mid-roster. Her voice tightened. She jerked her chin toward the altar beyond the open curtain, where John's silhouette was gone, but the slip of paper still lingered in her mind. Every detail that didn't line up made everything else sink deeper. She looked at Marisol across the table. "The doubts kept getting louder, even when I told myself they were distractions." Teresa leaned forward. "What happens when the doubts speak louder than devotion?" Elise swallowed. "You feel like you're tearing out the part of you that told him to trust, that told everyone he was stable," she said. "Leaning into doubt feels like betrayal, but staying quiet feels like lying." Marisol shifted in her chair and added, "I told Elise I'm struggling because the roster incident keeps looping. This interview," she tapped the recorder, "makes me say things I've been mushing down. It's like the more we're asked, the more the ache grows. I'm starting to fear the doubt is proof I'm failing the devotion I promised." Her fingers wrapped around the writing pad, the pen hovering but not moving. "I used to think if I just prayed harder, nothing would slip through. Now I hear my own questions louder than the prayers." Sister Teresa let out a short breath. "You're not betraying anything," she began. But the volunteers shook their heads. Tension spiked when the deacon walked in with the roster and stood in the doorway, watching the faint red light. He cleared his throat. "If doubt is a breach, what do we do when it feels like the only honest thread left?" Elise's jaw tightened. "We keep telling ourselves silence means loyalty," she snapped, then bit the words back. "But this," she lifted her hands, palms out. "This telling, even when it hurts, feels more honest than pretending everything is normal." Her voice dropped to a whisper. Marisol's shoulders loosened. She exhaled with a rattle that made the recorder hum. The deacon walked to the table, leaned on his elbows. "We're all afraid of what others will think when we admit we're afraid," he said, eyes flicking to the recorder. "But if the doubt swallows us, if we stop speaking, then the devotion we built turns into a cage." A volunteer from the choir raised her hand, suddenly sure. "Maybe the reward is in the telling," she said, voice trembling. "We're not breaking the vow. We're keeping it honest. The more we say, the less it feels like a betrayal." The recorder still clicked softly. The interviews continued, voices overlapping. And with each confession, the emotional ball of tension in the room shifted, loosening just enough to give anyone listening a sliver of daylight. Elise slid the recorder toward herself and pressed stop. "We have to keep talking," she said, as much to her reflection in the dark window as to anyone else. "Even if it sounds like doubt. Otherwise, we're just pretending." Candles guttered against the high windows, while the vigil's leftover hush stirred through the nave. Elise had her palm flat on the lectern, eyes sharp enough to crack the stone. John stepped back from the sacristy door, the folded slip bulging in his vest like a coin about to fall. Marisol hovered a step to Elise's left, fingers tugging the hem of her sleeve as if anchoring herself. "You promised 10 minutes," Elise said, voice low, cutting the air short. "Show me the names." "Why, Lena? She isn't on any roster," she said. "Why hide any name at all?" He pressed his palms into the wood. "Lena visited the hospice. She's a friend." "She's not listed with the volunteers," Elise snapped, barely smelling the fevered air. "Lena Mercer was the one who asked about the roster while you were lingering. She asked for a private blessing, John. You never told us." John's jaw worked. "I was protecting the sanctity of the request." Marisol took a breath that rattled like a bell. Protecting it from who? John looked between them, the slip now a thin line between his fingers. He released it back onto the altar with a shake, as if it had burned him. "I didn't want to upset us by hiding something you decided had to stay hidden," Elise said. "We need to know what trust looks like now. We can't pretend we're united when suspicion keeps knocking." John stilled. The slip lay open, names exposed. Marisol bent, smoothing it with the pat of her palm as if to steady the paper and the room. "Elise," Marisol said quietly, "Lena asked me yesterday why you were so interested in the roster. She was polite, but she watched you." "John, we can't let devotion silence the questions any longer." The words hung between the columns of pews. John looked down, blinking hard enough to hide his face. Elise let out a breath that rounded into something like resolve. "You're not the only one guarding the vigil," she said. "But now we watch you too." He didn't argue. He didn't reach for the slip. He simply turned, walking toward the altar steps, leaving the names to rest in the candlelight. The paper stayed between them, testimony of trust unspooling. Marisol stepped closer to Elise, shoulders easing. The tension didn't disappear, but it shifted. Two allies now keeping their eyes open rather than bowing their heads. Elise folded the slip flat again, letting it rest on the altar. "Tomorrow," she said, "we read it together and decide if these guardians are really ours." John didn't respond, but he stayed within sight. The truth now open, unhidden, unwilling to be compartmentalized away from devotion anymore. The candles burned lower, and in that flicker the nave felt less like a shelter from doubt and more like a place where doubt could be named aloud without massacre. Elise backed away from the altar rail, sliding the edge of the guardian list under her palm before Marisol could twist it shut. The recording microphone still sat on the folding table, but the room already felt quieter than during the interviews. In the doorway, the deacon rested his shoulder against the frame, eyes flitting between the sacristy and John's last shadow around the corner. The choir volunteer held a stack of hymnals, fingers drumming the leather covers to keep the nervous rhythm steady. "He told me 10 minutes, Marisol whispered, voice sharp enough to crack the silence. "It's been 12. The vigil is supposed to start, and he's still nowhere inside the sacristy." Elise didn't look away from the list. "Then he gets the list now," she said. "We read it before anything else. If he wants to keep calling it devotion, he can sit with us and listen." She slid the papers toward the center of the table and set her palm on top, pressing down as if to pin the motionless words steady. They heard John's footsteps finally. Short, deliberate, his shadow folding across the stone floor before his whole frame slipped through the doorway. He stopped the instant he saw them together, hovering with the cross stitched onto his vest, catching light. "I told you I'd be back," he said, keeping his voice even. "The extra paperwork needed. You told us the same before you disappeared with that roster." Marisol cut in, stepping forward. "We're done letting rosters collect dust." John glared at the folded papers on the table as if they might sprout fangs. "Those names are for tomorrow. I need time to sort the requests." Elise uncapped her fingers and lifted the top sheet. Then hear them now. Let's all read them together, and you do not take that slip out of my hand until we finish. She held the paper between them like a dare. We are not handing this moment back to silence. John's shoulders tensed. He reached for the list anyway, but Elise moved faster, her thumb catching his wrist. If you had nothing to hide, she said, you wouldn't move when I touch it. He jerked back, the friction between them sharp enough that the deacon flinched. I'm protecting people, he said, jaw tight. You're asking me to throw open every name and invite chaos. The deacon stepped in, but Marisol already leaned toward John, her face steady. Maybe we're asking to protect the same people, she said. Maybe we're done pretending the gap isn't there when you leave us in the dark. John's hands rose, palms facing them, and for the first time the room saw that he wasn't just annoyed. He was holding himself up by effort. Letting go doesn't mean stepping back into what can hurt you, he muttered. Clinging doesn't mean you're wrong for holding on. Elise slid a chair back, then sat. We are weighing both right now, she said, tone low but clear. We can let go and keep pretending this is devotion untouched by doubt, or we can lean in and read those names without you taking them away. She tapped the paper. The tension is already awake, John. We chose to feel it. John stared at the list. The room held its breath, and even the choir volunteers stopped drumming. Slowly, reluctantly, John sat opposite Elise, his hands hovering near the paper as if it might burn him. Marisol took the edge nearest her and unfolded the first name, Lena Mercer. She said it aloud, watching John flinch around the syllables. She asked about the roster. She asked if you were making changes. Marisol's voice stayed steady. We're going to read every name, John. Every guardian will be spoken, and nobody walks away, because we're afraid of where that leads. John didn't look at her when he spoke. You think you're going to break something if you know? Maybe, Elise answered. But you already broke our silence. This is how we fix what's left. She ran her thumb along the crease of the list. We can keep clinging to every good thing he's done, or we can let the list be what it is, a ledger of responsibility. The room exhaled with her words. John let his gaze drop to Lena's name again, then to the others waiting beneath it. The air throbbed with the clash of devotion yearning for certainty and the mistrust that refused to be placated. He reached out slowly and set his palm on the papers beside Elise's, not on top, just beside, as if physically acknowledging the gap while keeping respect for the boundary. Marisol leaned forward. Tomorrow, we read the guardian list together, she said, resolution settling into the space between them. Tonight, we started with this one. The payoff rippled through the group. Elise's grip on the paper eased slightly, John's fingers relaxed, and the deacon nodded once, a small acknowledgement that the confrontation had finally been had. Tension still hung, but the weight shifted. They were no longer merely a chorus of mistrust. They were a team choosing whether to let go or clutch harder, right there in the glow of the altar candles. Morning light through the stained glass hit the steps in bands as Elise led John, Marisol, the deacon, and the choir volunteer into the empty chapel. Elise kept her hand on the wooden railing, gaze fixed on the folded slip on the altar. The air was already full of the weight of what had been said. She set the slip between them and said, "We read it together now. No more whispers. No more you walking off with it." John's shoulders tightened. "We could what?" Marisol snapped. Respect the fact that we're here and refuse to let you pocket it? That's what we're doing. The deacon stepped forward, palms flat on the altar. We're all here. This list belongs to all of us. If there's something I need to know about a guardian, I'm hearing it now. John hesitated, thumb brushing the edge. He looked to Elise. I just need a moment. There are names that... Elise cut in, voice low but steady. If you needed a moment, you could have asked. Instead, we had silence and excuses. We won't go back to silent devotion. We agreed. Emotional integrity over pretending everything is fine. He exhaled slowly, then let his fingers rest beside hers, the same place as before, but he didn't pull the slip away. Marisol flipped open the parchment. We read it aloud. Each name, each guardian, together. Lena Mercer is on the list, line 4. When the name landed in the air, John's chin lifted. She's a long-time guardian. I didn't think... Long time doesn't mean untouchable, Elise said, corners of her mouth curling enough to show she wasn't backing down. We all just heard you hide that name. John's eyes flicked to the stained wood, to Marisol, to the deacon. You're going to tell everyone? That's not how things work. We're going to tell the council that we read it together, the deacon said. We can't keep letting doubt fester in silence. If Lena Mercer is on the list and no one told me, I need to know why. A moment of silence fell. Charged, the choir volunteer leaned forward, hand on the pew, breathing shallow. This is the part where we quit pretending we're blind, she said. We're not blind anymore. John finally exhaled, the tension in his jaw easing. Fine. Share it. He pulled the slip back, then hesitated and placed it between them, the same place as before. But next time, I'm telling you first. That's the only way now, Elise said. And for the first time, the softness in her voice carried trust, not doubt. No more shadows. They read the list aloud, each name rolling through the chapel, and every time a name landed, it carried weight. Proof that the truth had moved from silence to voice. When they reached Lena Mercer, Marisol paused, checked the roster again, then nodded. I'll put this on the council's agenda, the deacon said after the last name. We'll bring the list into the light. John nodded. Quiet. Elise flexed her fingers around the slip, and when she handed it to Marisol for safekeeping, the gesture felt like passing a baton. Letting go wasn't clean, but it wasn't ignorable anymore. As they stepped out of the chapel, the air outside smelled like rain and new beginnings. The truth remained hard, but with it came the relief of not pretending otherwise. The candles guttered as council papers were placed between the palms of the deacon, his thumbs flattening the corners of the guardian list that had once been a private weight in John's vest. Elise stepped back, the air between her and John a clear space that pulsed with the sound of her own breathing. Marisol stood beside her, fingers curled around the arm of the choir volunteer, both angled toward the doorway, as if they could pull the future with their shoulders. John tried to meet Elise's eyes, but she let her gaze drift past him, resting on the corridor where the late sun lay in shards. He reached for the slip again, an old reflex, but the choir volunteer's hand was already resting there, a seal on the paper that no longer belonged to one keeper. Elise let go of his wrist before he could stiffen, and turning, she opened the sacristy door with a soft insistence. The hall held its breath, filling with the scrape of her shoes on stone, the murmur of the others following. John remained behind, the candles mirrored in his eyes, and as the door closed, the echo of its latch sounded final. Outside, footsteps faded. Inside, trust did not return.